Hello, I'm Natalie Rowe and I'm the chair of the York Settlement Community Players. We're producing a play this February and it is Loot by Joe Orton and it's at York Theatre Royal.
My name's Katie Leckey and I'm directing that show and you should definitely come and see it.
So Loot was considered kind of a controversial play when it was first written in the 60s. Why was that?
Because it is controversial. I think the contents of the play are controversial and were controversial. It's all the things in the play are made to shock you and are made to make you a bit uncomfortable, I think, but also to make you laugh. At the time that it was put on, the Lord Chamberlain's office, they had this massive list of rules of things that you could say and not say. And Joe Orton was like, I don't care for that at all. So I'm going to put as many things in the play that I can that will offend you and make you uncomfortable and make the Lord Chamberlain's office very cross. The Lord Chamberlain's office wrote a special list of things that they weren't allowed to do in the play, and if they did they would get arrested. So in the original run, loads of the actors were on stage and they were told that if they say certain lines they would actually get arrested. So there was a long list of stuff like can't use live actors as dead people, you can't say swear words, you can't mention the royal family, can't mention sex, can't really mention like anything that's in the play because all that stuff is in the play. It was controversial because the whole thing is actually controversial and meant to be.
Do you think any of that controversy still stands today?
I always remember, like, I was reading Joe Orton's diaries and lots of his interviews and stuff, and there was someone asked him basically like, you know, why do you like farce so much? Why do you like writing scandalous stuff? You know, how dare you write such filthy things? And he was like, well, the reason that I do it is because taboo is interesting and farce has taboo at the centre. And basically, to paraphrase him, he goes, the biggest taboo of life is death. And I think that's still true. Like, you don't, the way that you kind of go and watch a comedy, you don't necessarily think it's going to be about death. Like, death is at the centre of this, and that's what makes it very uncomfortable and quite shocking. So I think that element of it is still controversial, and how the characters treat death and how they talk about death, how they behave around death is controversial and is uncomfortable. But I think some of the more like traditional farcical elements about, like, you know, sex and kind of different partners and homosexuality is definitely not as controversial as it would have been in the original run, but that's why we decided to still set it in the 1960s so that people could see what has changed, hopefully for the better, but also maybe what hasn't changed at all and what still gets people a bit riled up.
And one of the main characters is a police officer as well,
yes.
So there's quite a lot about the police and brutality and so on.
Yeah. The thing is with Orton is that he always kind of punches up, right? So his humour, I think, is very much like him being like, kind of navigating his own lived experiences as a gay man. I think a lot of that comes from his own experience and what he's seen of like that A, upper middle class mentality, and B, like basically police brutality. So I think a lot of that is injected into the work, which is really cool.
What can people expect when they come to see the play?
The unexpected, for real. Like, not to be cringe about it, but there's no way that I can tell you what the play is about. I cannot summarise what goes on in this play because it's insane. You think you're watching one thing 1 minute, and then before you know it, something else has happened that's more ridiculous than the last thing, and you've forgotten about the first ridiculous thing that you were shocked by a minute ago or that you were surprised by. I want to look directly in the camera and tell you 3 things about this play. There is an eyeball that rolls on the floor. There is false teeth that get thrown around, and there's a coffin that goes on fire. It is impossible to describe what the play is about if I try, and I'm directing it, and I think that I should be able to describe what it's about. It's kind of like, it starts off as a funeral, and it's almost like a tragedy. Like, I think it could be maybe a tragedy if the themes were treated differently, but it's not. And then it moves into like a heist, but the heist has sort of already happened and it's kind of the fallout from that, and the police start sniffing around. So it's very difficult to like pigeonhole it into one genre or like what it's actually about, because it's about really whatever you kind of want it to be about. I think there's a lot of themes that you could pick out of it. But yeah, I think the less you know about it, the better, I think. Yeah.
So who are the main characters in Loot?
So I would say the main character is, ironically, the lady that's dead, and that's Mrs. McLeavy, and she's like the kind of matriarch of the family, but she's just recently passed away. And her husband, Mr. McLeavy, is a bit pathetic, a bit like not very switched on to the events of the real world and of the new free society of the swinging 60s. His son Hal is an absolute degenerate, there's no other way of putting it, but he's also quite funny and sweet in a weird kind of way. And then his boyfriend is called Dennis, and he drives a hearse for the undertakers who are carrying out the funeral. And then his girlfriend is the nurse of the late Mrs. McLeavy and is now looking to marry Mr. McLeavy, now that he's a widower. And then we've got Inspector Truscott, and he comes sniffing around because he's heard that there's been a bank robbery. And then his assistant is called Meadows, who is just a lovely, eager police officer who's really chill, and actually maybe represents the generally well-meaning members of law-abiding society. But you can be your own judge of that as well.
Tell us a bit more about Joe Orton.
Well, he was basically one of the up-and-coming stars of the 1960s, and he was a bit of a pariah because of his content was so controversial, but actually by the end of his life he was kind of becoming more mainstream, and was gonna have a big movie deal with the Beatles that then he got all the money for, and then was never able to spend it. And I think he became more popular at large whenever it happened and was successful. He grew up in Leicester, and from a really working class family, and basically auditioned for RADA because he'd done some community drama stuff. But then when he was at RADA, he met his long-term partner Kenneth Halliwell, and they became kind of a unit. They would write together, and they would read together, and they would sleep together, and they would do everything together. But Joe could be very nasty. There's a lot of his diary entries are just extremely nasty, and really horrible about Ken, and he would sleep around a lot as well, which really made Kenneth Halliwell angry. Ken would basically try and, I don't know, he thought he taught Joe everything that he knew, which made him very jealous. So then when they both went to prison separately, Joe started writing his own stuff. Kenneth Halliwell was still writing but not getting anywhere. But crucially, Joe's work got picked up and then became very successful. And that made Kenneth Halliwell very, very jealous. And paired with mental illness, paired with societal pressures about being gay, and among many, many other things, basically, Joe Orton got murdered by Kenneth Halliwell in a really violent way in their own apartment. And it's just really sad because actually, I think Joe Orton only has 7 or 8 plays in total that he was able to publish, and it's a really small body of work, but I think that's why it's such a privilege to be able to look at, you can sort of see the growth even in that little tiny space of time. I think it's just really nice to be able to put his work on because, he was a controversial person as much as his plays are controversial, but I think, it's all sort of part and parcel of one thing. If you want to do the play, you have to talk about Joe.
Do you think he has a unique theatrical voice? Do you feel that voice as you're directing the play?
I think it's the most unique theatrical voice that I've ever heard. The way that he writes some of the stuff is just genius. There's no other way of putting it. I think the way that he utilises language and sort of really flamboyant turns of phrase and really strange alliteration and really quick fire dialogue, weird monologues. He just has such a grasp of language that is able to make fun of language itself almost. So I think it's super unique, and it also is I think he has this kind of rage. It's a biting sort of viciousness that I think is justified from his lived experience as a queer person. But the way that he veils it is in comedy, and then sometimes it just pokes through the comedy, and you're oh, that's something a bit unexpected, that's a bit dramatic, that's a bit nasty, and you're why does that feel nasty? I don't get where that comes from. And then you think about what you've just seen, and you're oh no, it's been there the whole time. It's kind of bubbling under the surface a little bit. So I think his language is super interesting, and the way that he writes is interesting, and I hope that I've foregrounded that in the production as well. I think there's a lot of times where I'll just kind of let the dialogue speak for itself, but I do think it's worth doing that in this situation because it's so good.
He had a big run-in with the Lord Chamberlain's office over this play.
He did.
They tried to censor lots and lots of elements, but you're bringing all of those elements back into this production.
Yes, I am.
So how does that work?
Well, it basically, there was this massive list of rules of things that you can't say, things that you can't do, and I'm basically I'm doing it as he wrote it. It's a kind of homage to him and what he wanted and his intentions. Very easily, it could be very upsetting. So I think this play sets itself firmly in the tradition of farce in that it treats things that are shocking and a little bit sort of taboo, I guess. because I suppose that's what like traditional farce is, like something from Molière does. There's always like some sort of ingenue who, you know, hides and
has to hide under a tablecloth,
yeah,
semi-nude, and
yeah, or like in a trapdoor or something.
Yeah, like, then like a policeman turns up, or a vicar,
yeah,
an authority figure, and that's actually all of those things kind of happen in Loot.
Yeah, but only this time we've got a wardrobe, a coffin, and a medical screen, and a very nasty police inspector, and the ingenue's a dead body. So I mean, like, it's the same thing, but he's treated it differently, I think. And that's why it's so genius, because it's just the sort of like perfect modern farce. All those things combined with like a darkness, people kind of want to see that. Like, I think there's a sneaky little bit of everybody that's like, ooh, that's dark, I want to laugh at that, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like even if you came to the show and tried not to laugh, I think you would have a very hard time.
And you've actually decided to set it in the 1960s.
Yeah, absolutely. It says a lot about the sort of society as it was then. So like, especially to do with homosexuality is a really big theme in the play, because obviously it was very much Joe Orton's like life. I've tried to, yes, while setting it in the same time that it was written, try and freshen it up a bit and make people think about, you know, maybe what's changed, what's not changed, and why is stuff funny.
So how can people get tickets?
They can go on the York Theatre Royal website and just look up Loot, and there will be tickets available from the 18th to the 27th of February, and that's when the show is. So come see the show, yay! No, it's so fun and silly, but also it has a lot of like themes that are very pertinent and important, but I think it's all in the sort of style of something that's really flamboyant and really a bit extra, to be honest. So it makes it more digestible, but then it's also a little bit shocking and fun and unpredictable. And if you don't know the play at all, you should come and see the play because you don't know what it's about, because I don't want to spoil too much, but it's very wild. And it goes a bit up and down, like a bit of a roller coaster. So I think if you want something exciting, if you want something fresh, you should come and see it.